Why can't I turn away from Denis Villeneuve and Tom Ford's psychological thrillers? Nocturnal Animals and Enemy are by all means very different films, yet they both feel the same. Both are gripping and nail-biting at the same time, like a car crash you can't turn away from. They glue you to your seat and dry out your eyes with a strange mix of shock and fascination. They stay with you. Their stories aren't so much entertaining, but rather deeply bizarre. They trigger our curiosity and beg for our attention. Like a book, the audience isn't made to feel part of the film. We know we're sitting in front of a screen watching. Instead, the films act as an opportunity to follow along the lives of the protagonists, furiously turning pages to see what arises. Watching both Enemy and Nocturnal Animals, one almost feels like a narrator, a third person looking over the shoulder of the main character, experiencing what they see, yet without being a part of it. Indeed, we feel like the camera in the room. And perhaps that's what makes both films so appealing, the sense that we are powerless observers here for the thrill, but just as lost as the protagonists themselves. Never do we feel like we know any more or any less than they do. Instead, the films let our minds race, likely thinking similar thoughts to the protagonists. This equality, the films not giving the audience the privilege of superior knowledge or uninvolved apathy, is what makes these psychological thrillers so thrilling. No matter how bizarre or how harsh what we're seeing is, we have no choice but to keep watching. We adjust like the characters. Enemy and Nocturnal Animals, despite sneaking in some elements from the genre, are not horror movies, but in their exploration of shattering storylines, of the absurd, they both manage to convey a very peculiar feel. Mesmerising horror. To begin with, Nocturnal Animals and Enemy are quiet. Too quiet, albeit in different ways. There's a tendency in modern filmmaking to have constant sound. Dialogue, score, foley, absolute silence drawn out is purposely avoided. But the magic of sound in film, paradoxically, is also about silence, when not to have sound. Making movies with multiple scenes of long, uninterrupted silences takes talent. It's easy for the viewers to lose focus, the pauses can disrupt the flow of the story, and generally take the audience out of it. But in Nocturnal Animals and Enemy, it's the very opposite. The lack of music, or dialogue, or sound makes you focus that much more, leaning in towards the screen, apprehensive. The lack of constant background music is appealing for two reasons. Firstly, it enforces the equality of the audience vis-a-vis the characters. The score doesn't tell us what to feel, and it doesn't spoil the coming scenes. It makes the film more of a journey than mindless entertainment. The lack of musical cues and background music forbid us from just sitting back in our seats. We're forced to experience things like the characters do, rather than like the score tells us to. Nocturnal Animals does have an interesting score, but it isn't specifically used during moments of tension as is usually the case in action and drama films. Instead, the silence is the tension. The score is loudest in the very beginning and very end of the film. We hear it and nothing else during the intro sequence, but it's totally quiet a few minutes in when Susan is having a conversation with her husband. As we cut to the next scene, the score returns in the background of the party they're attending. Then during the party, when a colleague asks Susan whether she still loves her husband, in the few seconds where she turns away to look at him,
Do you still love him?
not answering the question,
I'm being summoned. Pardon me.
the score fades. Scores can massively impact the drama of a scene, but Nocturnal Animals often does the opposite, using silence to highlight moments of tension. In the driving sequence that kicks off the plot in the book Susan is reading, the protagonist comes across two cars, driving side by side in total darkness. When many directors would make the choice of having eerie background music to highlight the suspense, in Nocturnal Animals, it's practically silent. We hear only what the protagonist hears, the roar of his restored Mercedes Classic. Tony, pictured as Edward in the novel, trying and failing to find a radio station to play, only adds to this. Not only does it reinforce the remoteness in which the events are about to take place, but the absence of casual radio music playing dramatically increases the tension for both the passengers in the car and us. Enemy score is slightly more present than that of Nocturnal Animals. What it does instead is block out ambient noise. When the score is playing, there is no white noise, no sound effects, nothing to tie us to reality. Just as the characters are, we're lost in our thoughts. The lack of dialogue, the most obvious tool of exposition, is another sign of masterful restraint. The story isn't spoon-fed to us, we know only what the protagonist does, and just like Adam, we struggle to comprehend it. When there is dialogue, it's dominated by silence, with long pauses where even ambient noise fades. The first encounter between Adam and his doppelganger is eerily quiet.
I told you.
Less than 10 words are exchanged in almost 2 minutes of screen time. This sequence is a testament to great filmmaking. With an almost total lack of sound, the boring setting of a hotel room, cuts and reverse cuts of two characters staring at each other, and less than 10 words to hold our attention for 120 seconds. This recipe for boredom manages instead to be one of the most captivating scenes of the film. This clever use of silence in dialogue is similarly present in Nocturnal Animals, in the dinner scenes where the protagonist's relationship is exposed to us.
Time around your brother just to be around you.
What's missing here? Why does this restaurant sequence feel different?
Well, I had no idea Cooper was gay.
I don't think he knew back then, but he was obsessed with you.
Wow.
Yeah. If I hadn't caught you staring at me so much, I would have thought you were sleeping with him.
I can't hear anything.
Terrible.
There are no glasses clinking, no conversations on neighbouring tables, no ambiance.
Hope I didn't hurt him.
There are just our two protagonists, and not even their plates and glasses can be heard. It's the silence that makes me pay that much more attention. The climax of Edward's book, the shooting, Susan reading, and the flashbacks to Edward discovering she aborted his child, all of these scenes of intense drama near the end of the film entirely lack background music. Not even a second of it. And this for a full 8 minutes. Sound is integral to filmmaking, and mastering it is knowing when not to have it. The way both films are shot also heavily contributes to the atmosphere they convey. It's as if we're with the protagonists, silently observing. The cinematography has a style that I describe as a fly on the wall. While both films are beautifully shot, the primary goal of the camera is to give the audience an external view of the realities that the films inhabit. We're often alone with the protagonists, and the cinematography is here to show us what they see, so we can feel what they feel. There's a simplicity to it. There are no unnecessary shots, no real B-roll, so to speak, and whatever can be achieved with just one angle is usually captured by just one camera. Very rarely are we shown two different angles of the same subject. This use of single-angle scenes allows the films to play through one lens. We rarely feel as though there is more than one set of eyes in the room. In Enemy, the camera often sits in strange places, like an insect looking at someone walk into a room. There's an almost documentary-like quality to how the camera moves. There is no shaking to emphasize drama, no whipping, and few cuts compared to modern Hollywood standards. In a way, the camera acts as the eyes of the audience. In the same sense that the protagonists use their eyes to discover the world around them, we rely on the camera. There are no fancy camera moves, nothing to remind us there is one. Instead, the camera floats. This subjectively objective way of capturing the scenes of both films makes them so gripping. In Enemy specifically, the tracking shots feel like we're following the protagonist, creeping up behind him. The use of slow pans that hug the corners of rooms and buildings makes every scene thrilling. You stare at the screen waiting for the pan to reach its critical angle, revealing whatever is or isn't just around the corner. In Nocturnal Animals, similarly, we also follow the protagonist as the plot unfolds. The camera is external, yet always manages to show us things from the protagonist's perspective. When Edward is forced to drive out in the middle of the desert, we're there with him. When he gets thrown out of the car, we stay with him. We don't see where the antagonists are or what is happening to the other characters. When Edward tries to make his way out of the desert, we walk with him, alone. The camera forces us to experience things as he is experiencing them, and by extension Susan reading the novel. But perhaps it's in their stories that both films are so similar. Both Enemy and Nocturnal Animals, at their core, tell tales of the absurd. They're often uncomfortable to watch, very much so for the latter, but bizarre to the extent of fascination, the morbid curiosity that overpowers our repulsion. Jake Gyllenhaal portrays characters that seem rather normal, even bland, but have their worlds turned upside down by things out of their control. They're both desperately hanging on a roller coaster they wish they could get off of. In Enemy, Adam's routine life is displayed through repetition of similar shots, teaching lectures that get more and more dull, walking home in the coldness of the city through the same streets, and having routine sex with his girlfriend, seemingly the only thing that connects the two. Adam seems to lack passion for just about everything, including his girlfriend.
I don't know. I don't go out that much. I don't really like movies.
The baseline is established, and the plot can now tear it all down. Things go a little deeper in Nocturnal Animals since there are two protagonists. Susan, the real-life protagonist, and Tony, pictured as her ex-husband Edward, the protagonist in the book she's reading. Both protagonists see their lives shattered as the film progresses. Tony, as a series of unfortunate events take his family from him, and Susan, as she becomes absorbed by the novel, picturing Tony as Edward and his family as her own. Similarly to Enemy, while Susan leads a very different life to Adam, she too appears lost, numb. While she's presented as a successful artist living a comfortable life among LA's elite, she lives in fear of others finding out how close she is to being broke, and she lacks passion for her cheating husband. The baseline is set, and Edward's novel destroys it. In both films, the protagonists are passengers, and as the films take them down their dark roads, we're taken along with them. It isn't a comfortable ride for anyone, but there is no stopping it. We're gripped. Edward, or Tony rather, is never dominant, never on top of things. This is particularly obvious in the exchanges with the antagonists.
Okay, I'm a Gemini, my favorite color's petal pink.
He laughs along uncomfortably to their jokes. He tries to avoid conflict, not to be the bigger man, but because of fear. As he argues with the antagonist, he's the quietest of his family. When he does speak, the fear is palpable in his voice.
We are just trying to get where we are going.
Similarly, Adam's voice when he first speaks to his clone and his wife on the phone tells us about this fear and weakness.
Hello?
Good afternoon.
Hey.
I'm calling to speak to Denis.
This lack of control is one the audience partakes in as we follow the protagonist throughout the films. We watch the events unfold with no control over them, just like they do. There's a shared lack of dominance. Edward lets himself and his family be spoken to horribly and just takes it. Similarly to Adam when his clone tells him he's going to take his girlfriend on a romantic getaway.
Come back here and I'm going to bring back all your
They can't fight it.
Disappear from your life forever. Then we will be even.
Enemy and Nocturnal Animals impose a remarkably similar power dynamic between protagonist and antagonist. The directors put the characters and the audience at a disadvantage, pushing them to the extreme. The result is two very different films that feel strangely similar. In both Ford and Villeneuve's films, Jake Gyllenhaal's characters are forced to experience pain, shock, incredulity by larger-than-life figures, a mysterious doppelganger in Enemy and a sweet-talking psychotic redneck in Nocturnal Animals.
I should have stopped it! I should have stopped it!
The facial expressions that dominate both films are those of trauma and incomprehension. Watching these movies, our facial expressions are much the same, not just because of the bizarre, twisted plots, but because of the lack of resolution. And perhaps that's what makes both movies work so well as psychological thrillers, their lack of resolution. We can never truly wrap our heads around what exactly has happened. We just sit and gawk as the credits roll. In Nocturnal Animals, when Susan reaches the final page of Edward's book, there is no happy ending. The crimes remain just as incomprehensible. Similarly, in the true end of the film, there is no peace for Susan. Edward never shows up. The final scene in Enemy is all the more confusing. The equality we share with the protagonists, the fact we are following them rather than free to see things omnisciently, means there is no closure for us, either. The films stay with us. By keeping us in the dark with restrained dialogue and exposition, but allowing us to follow the characters on their surreal journeys, the camera acting like the eyes of a silent narrator, these films reel us in. They break us, confuse us, devastate us.